All right, so welcome to the Covert Access Team podcast. I'm here with Brett and Pascal, and we're going to be talking about OT environments, OT security, what's good with it, what's wrong with it, what needs to be fixed with it. And Pascal, we'll start with you. Could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Pascal Ackerman, currently the Senior Global Threat Detection and Response Engineer with 1898. So that's a big, giant title to basically say I'm helping our customers look into their OT and ICS environments and make sense of all the things that are happening, right, from a security incident and a network security perspective. So I've been doing that close to a year now with 1898, but I'm not new to the OT and the cybersecurity space. I've been doing this since 1999, initially as a controls engineer, but over time I started to specialize more in building large scale industrial networks, and of course with the cybersecurity that came along with it. Really been well, since about 2003, I've been focusing on cybersecurity on a large scale ISAS environment perspective, almost all the time.
Okay, so 26 years of experience. That's definitely more than most people have had some form of experience. So I assume you know what you're doing by this point.
Yeah, along the way, I've been in positions where I built industrial control systems and environments. I've been in positions where I've done it wrong, right? Where I implemented the easy button and then I've also been in play. I've also been in positions where I have had the chance to build it correctly. Foundational secure networking. I've done pen testing and assessments and risk assessments and all kinds of offensive projects within the industrial space. I've done the security monitoring, and now I'm more on the MSSP, the managed service provider, security service provider side. That gives me the chance to work with more customers and basically touch on more of the industry all at once. And it's been a fantastic journey. I don't know what's next, but I'm very happy with what I'm doing right now.
Well, that's fantastic, man. Honestly, I would say that somebody like yourself, who's gotten to play all sides of the game, the defense side, the response side, the defense side, when you've done all of that, you have a lot more understanding of the systems, because you're not just coming at it from like, oh, I've only ever done offensive or I've only ever done defensive. Like you seem to have done it all. So I assume that
Yeah.
you have a really good understanding of not just like what the problems you guys are facing are, but like how to actually what's realistic to resolve them.
Exactly. And I've seen a trend in the last years of industrial cybersecurity researchers who will just bombard the environment with CVEs. Oh, we found the latest and greatest. If somebody in your environment has this particular one line of code, they can take down everything. We've been through the years and years of people using Stuxnet to promote industrial cybersecurity. But in the end, being able to really bring that down to a level where you say, "Oh, this is really important to your environment," and spoiler, for most environments, that is still ransomware. And I will probably touch on that later, but really being able to say, okay, this is really important for your environment is just crucial because there's so much fluff in this space at the moment, and it's understandable, right? It's a new field. There's a lot of money to be made. There's a lot of research and a lot of progress still to be made in this space. But for most customers, being able to just say, okay, this is what we really concentrate on, and the rest will follow later if once we get our affairs in order is a valuable trait to have.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Brett, why don't could I get you to introduce yourself too, since you're on the call? I don't
Absolutely.
want to.
Yeah, no, I thought I would just come and hang out and listen to Pascal spread some gospel and hold court. It's something that I never miss an opportunity to do once he gets going, right? Because my journey in cybersecurity is kind of like okay, Pascal and I are kind of complementary opposites in an archetype that we see commonly that we'll cover in some of our future conversation today, where he has the perspective of the responsibility of ensuring process integrity through industrial cybersecurity, where he is an engineer. And I come from the schoolhouse of IT cyber, enterprise cyber, right? The desktop support, the enterprise administration that I did in my various positions before I joined the United States Navy. are the fundamental, more IT traditional centric focus and biases that we have to navigate when we're, working with our clients to navigate the culture issues for IT versus OT. What should be IT with OT. And that's what Pascal and I are able to do, because in 2016, whenever I went to the Navy Cyber Defensive Operation Command, which is the SOC for the Navy. I had the great fortune of being a part of a cyber protection team that had a mission set that included the DoD Tier 1 critical asset of time generation, which is a OT control system. And I quickly referenced the memory of my time in the Joint Cyber Analysis course when I was a baby cyber analyst in the Navy, to really think about that penetration tester course that we had, the offset course, where the guy told me that, yeah, he was on an NSA red team op, and he did a ping scan on a network, right? And it was all within his rules of engagement, but of course it probably wasn't scoped right, because how could it be when the person that they had to bring out of retirement to bring the PLC back online hadn't worked at the place, and he was the only one that understood how the TCP/IP stack was implemented. So that PLC fell down 3 days afterwards, and in that story where we were getting some interesting context and culture understanding as baby cyber analysts in the DoD, I realized that the way for me to be able to have the greatest impact in my life's work is to focus on defending critical infrastructure,
Uh,
because some rich old famous dead dude said we're 9 mils away from absolute collapse of society. It's a philosophical thought, but that's 3 days of no lights, power, and critical infrastructure. And I think that's enough damage that we couldn't put the genie back in the bottle.
Well, you're
Amen.
probably yeah. I don't think that you're wrong by any stretch of the imagination. Although I think the only question is not if, but how many meals. I
Yeah,
mean,
yes. Nine, right? Yeah, nine
yeah.
meals. And I think 3 days is we saw what happened with a few outages that we've had for just isolated supply chain support issues, whether it be gas prices, availabilities for Colonial, or widespread outages from natural disasters, right? It is a burdensome situation to have to navigate while you are responding to something like another natural disaster event. Um, but no, the as soon as I got an excuse, a mission focus to be able to target critical infrastructure, I started propositioning my leadership to fund training through the Idaho National Labs. And I have developed a relationship that, fortunately, even though I went to a different command, a development command afterwards in Fort Meade, um, I've been able to go and visit the national labs with every organization I've worked with since then. And that has been a fantastic experience, because there's not much better research and development on how to defend critical infrastructure and power systems than what comes out of that laboratory.
Man,
Um,
that's where it all started too.
yeah,
Aurora, that's where it
yep,
started.
correct.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
just really quick for the people who don't know what Aurora is. Was
Yeah,
it
please.
Michael Asante who in 2007? I don't get me on the. So he proved that cybersecurity can be brought to the physical realm by blowing up a diesel generator.
Warthog. I think it was a Warthog generator, if I remember.
I just don't know. I just know
Yeah.
it was a diesel generator where he basically by manipulating the way it was operated, he made it ramp up and slow down in the wrong moments, which then had a feedback effect, and it overbalanced the operations of the diesel generator, and he blew it up, and yeah, we've been mopping up the mess ever since.
That
Or
Wow.
I
sounds a
should
lot
say,
like the TTPs of a really famous industrial control system malware attack. I can't remember. It's one that's probably on every single history of industrial cybersecurity malware, usually at the beginning. Can't remember the name of it though. Yeah, it's kind of weird. But no, so after I got into the Idaho National Labs and found out what some of the magic words were, then I, of course, did my research to find what resources were available for me. And that's where I stumbled across a book called Industrial Cybersecurity. And as I told Pascal when he first came in, he's been working at 1898 and Co. For about 3 years, as I have, because the book was so impactful to me that it legitimately, like, we have a lot of overloaded terminology in industrial cyber. But industrial cybersecurity is the words that make the most sense to describe the thing, without the least amount of preconceived context to it. So the balance that Pascal and I have is one in which he has the primary focus in the relational context as a process control engineer, and I have it as a enterprise system architect is my most foundational skill set, before I became an auditor and a developer. And since he came on board, it has been fantastic to find somebody with a different background and with true diversity in context, to come to the same conclusions through separate processes and data sources. We've been building well together since he's came, and I've been happy to have somebody else. It's nice to be able to take an actual vacation too with all the retainers that we got.
Well,
Right.
it sounds like you guys work really well together, and it sounds like you guys have a ton of knowledge. So, I mean, you guys are like one big or one two-man OT security team there. Now,
So there's more. There's more people on the team, but
oh
we're
yeah,
taking
yeah,
we're
of course,
taking care of the incident response
right.
uh, part of it.
Now,
Yeah, and
you guys have mentioned 1898. Could you tell people like what that is, like what the organization is? I mean, it's a big organization, but it's one of those that kind of flies under the radar for a lot of people that they're not aware of it.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
I'd like to take that one. I'm kind of a nerd because I'm from Kansas City, and I like the history of how the Industrial Revolution took root and helped build this country. And in 1898, on April 1st, Burns and McDonnell came to Kansas City, Missouri, where they founded Burns and McDonnell Engineering Company. And a lot of the work that they did created the environments and the infrastructure that facilitated the Industrial Revolution and the modern age that we live in today. So 1898 and Co. is a homage to the way that Burns and Mac supported the breadbasket and the country and developing the critical infrastructure by the consulting services that we provide in the space. So Burns and Mac, our parent company, is a 125-year-old architectural engineering firm, architectural engineering and construction firm, that has been leading the market for 125 years. So we definitely enjoy access to, like, if I need to pen test trains, right, which for a pursuit that we were doing, I had the ability to call up a guy who's been designing the automatic braking system of trains for the last 30 years of his life and have a conversation about why is it that I can send raw RF and stop a train potentially. But why would
Well,
you want to do that, Brett?
yeah, yeah, right, exactly.
Yep.
Now, I can say from my experience, I remember many years ago, I was in an OT industrial environment as a cyber pen tester, and somebody actually had a binder. They were showing it to me, and it literally said it was like their incident response, and there was actually a guy's name and his phone number, and they just said in case of, I don't know, remember what the incident was, but in case of incident, call this number and ask for this person. How often does that actually happen, or is that
Probably
really?
still still 5 out of 10 times you will find a reference like that in an incident response plan, if you can even call it incident response plan, right? And it's like Brad said earlier on with the person who had implemented the ping protocol or the TCP/IP stack at his customer. It is these people who have done that for 40 years. They know every in and out of the program of the ICS environment, and they have to be called in because nobody else has any knowledge whatsoever to fix that. And that's dangerous in a lot of ways, right? That person could be hit by a train or a car, and all of that knowledge will disappear. He might
I
not
call
even
him
be
Bob the
available.
engineer.
Bob the
Bob the
engineer.
engineer.
He's not
Yeah,
gonna live
Bob the
forever.
engineer's everywhere. You
He's
know,
not gonna
everybody's
live
got
forever
Bob.
though.
What's that?
He's not gonna live forever though, you know. It's
No,
so that
no,
that by
Bob.
itself, your incident response plan should start with: do we have any one person shops? Is there anything that just one person can do? If that's true, we're gonna have to tackle that first, because that can't fly.
I think this is a great way to be able to kind of generalize one of the more specific technical problems that we see inside of OT, though, because this is the human version of that. Bob the engineer is the human version of legacy components in our OT environments, right? That's not going to last forever,
Sure.
but you have to be able to, like Bob the engineer probably submitted the original RFC for the TCP IP stack, and implemented himself before it was finalized. And he's the one that first put Modbus and TCP because he got tired of getting in the truck and driving to the other side of the facility. You know,
Yeah. No, yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, like, when you're talking about something like mainframe hacking, I mean, well, there's what, like 10 people on Earth who really understand it, who really could do mainframe hacking at like a high level. So one question that I have is, so we're talking about Bob the engineer, and you need to bring Bob back because he's the only guy who knows everything about a system. Is this because the IT OT separation is really vast? Is it integrating together? Why is it that only Bob knows all this? Is it because the IT and OT spaces are so fundamentally different that maybe the languages are really old, Fortran, COBOL, that sort of thing? Or why is it that you haven't updated any type of system yet? Or why is it that you have to rely on Bob?
Yeah, so I'll take that one. So it's mainly because of the industrial space being so disconnected, like you said, for the longest time. Well, up to about 15 to 20 years ago, it was all proprietary, it was all standalone, it was tucked away, air gapped, all that stuff. So there was really a large percentage of the install base was just makeshift systems, right? Just make it work. We got a system from vendor X, we get a system from vendor Y. They use completely different protocols to communicate, but somehow we need to make those two work together. They need to exchange. Some messages, some data, because otherwise the whole production line doesn't flow. And before TCP/IP and the network stack came in, people would use serial communication between there, right? So you would have an interpreter, somebody, the Bob the engineer would find out a way to communicate between the two systems over a serial cable, and he proudly implemented it. It ran for years and years and years because the reliability on that stuff is so high, and the uptime requirements and the difficulty of replacing these kind of systems, right? Because you want to rebuild something like that, it's going to cost you millions of dollars. So people just run with it. So that thing that he built back in the 70s, in the 80s, is still running. And now he retires, but nobody really digs into it because it's such a complicated beast that only he knows how to fix that kind of stuff.
so let's think about it like this. We have a very volatile chemical processing environment. And, there's a reason that the plant manager in chemical processing lives across the house, going all the way back to the production of gunpowder in France, because you want to make sure that the person that is accountable for safety is really invested in the process, right? So what you need to have there, and the part of the bias that I've observed from engineering that's harder for most IT guys to wrap their head around, which fortunately I have a very deep passion for the consequences of physics and being able to identify them, which is why I had to learn the hard way as a kid to, when you want to try to practice to fly, you should start from the ground. Uh, so Pascal
Not the
had to
roof,
learn.
not the roof.
I got some chip teeth. But Pascal had to learn the consequences of physical energy forces as day one. That's like one of the foundational things of engineering. So, like when I'm trying to think about ways to replace the legacy integrations inside of my enterprise environment, and I have all these dependencies that at the time were really cool and novel, and I made them myself, and then eventually the market productized it. I can just blow that away and build a new. But if I have a multi-million dollar money machine that the C-suite doesn't want to shut off for 1 second, then we have an environment where if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And if the safety, reliability, and the productivity of the process environment is stable, that beats what we have inside of enterprise IT of confidentiality, integrity, and availability.
So let me ask you a question. If I was to pen test a web app, some company comes along and says, "Hey, we have a website. It's out there. Could you just poke at it?" I'm going to jump on. I'm going to fire up Burp. I'm going to, try to directory brute force. I'm going to just do a whole bunch of stuff. And what you had mentioned was even just running a ping scan, something like Nmap or whatever, it may be enough to take down a PLC or a controller or something. So how difficult is it on the cyber end of things to actually secure an OT environment?
It's both difficult and easy. So like you said, so with a web application, when you do a pen test for a web application, you look for all these APIs, you look for user input, you look out for all these things that you can manipulate. Now you take that down to a production floor, and the main focus of a production floor is like a PLC. Most PLC, if not all of them at the moment, have no type of authentication, authorization, and accounting built in, right? That you don't have to authorize to make a change to that PLC. So typically, when I talk to customers, I say, once I can see your PLC, it's no longer your PLC because I can send a single packet, a Python script or whatever, to take the PLC down, to reprogram it, to make it stop functioning. So your defense for industrial environment isn't focused on that PLC because there is just no fix to apply to it, but it's putting the controls and the mechanisms around the entire network that hosts that PLC. So you pick your most vulnerable part of the processing environment and you put strong defenses around that with segmentation, with firewalls, with DMZs, so you prevent anything from entering that most inner core of your industrial environment. That's what
Gotcha.
what it comes down to. The nice thing is because these environments are so stagnant, right? You'll buy a PLC and 30 years from now you'll still be running that. It may be you replace it because it went down in a fire or you accidentally host a Millicon there. I actually saw that happen. But it's still the same kind of PLC, the same program running on there. So it's very stagnant. So you can start applying anomaly detection rules more easily. You always know that PLC will communicate with this HMI or with this workstation interface. If that dynamic changes, that's really good indication that something weird's going on. So it's easy to alarm on that. So it's difficult on one side because the industrial control system devices themselves don't have the controls built in, but it's easy because as a complete system, it's very easy to spot those anomalies.
Fair enough. Okay. So,
Yeah, one way to think about this is kind of a good one because inside of IT we have network segmentation, right? And that micro segmentation, right? And that's fairly easy to understand for most IT guys. Well, instead of NIST or the cyber standards that are mostly relied on, the engineer version of that, it comes from the International Society for Automation, ISA. They have 62443. They call it zones and conduits, right? Your conduit is essentially your east-west, firewall to DMZ, and your zones are like where your protection domain that's relevant to those devices for their operational requirements, right? And Pascal calls it a glass bubble. And I think it's a really great metaphor for it, right? Because you have this glass bubble and it has what should be just one little conduit, right? That lets you in and out. And here's something that you might be able to appreciate what Pascal was talking about in problems that we have in cyber. So, from your qualitative assessment, how often do you see syslog going over TCP?
Oh, well, I mean, it depends on the environment, I suppose.
Right, but the reason I ask is because a lot of these protocols, and this is what caused what I consider to be the great IT OT rift, which I can tell happened culturally about 20 years ago, across a bunch of different market verticals inside of critical infrastructure across the 16 different sectors, subsectors, and they said, hey, UDP is I mean, shoot, there's some network devices that won't even send TCP because you have to have a certificate exchange and it's the encrypted syslog communication, right? Well, that's additional overhead. It causes latency. And when you have millisecond requirements to be able to actuate a valve so that something doesn't blow up, right? Then you're not going to be so motivated to say, hey, it would be a good idea to increase our security posture by encrypting this packet and making it have additional latency.
That makes sense.
Yep.
So, I guess one question is do you see the overall trend for security? Do you see it becoming more secure or less secure as time goes on for the OT environments? I mean, I know that's a very general question,
Yeah.
but I mean, as you have more people entering into cybersecurity, and you see, I remember reading a while back, the Department of Energy said there's about 183 cyber or physical attacks on the U.S. infrastructure per year. Now, I understand from you guys, a lot of those might be squirrels, and we can talk about that. But do you see this becoming more of an issue, or do you think that the security is becoming better with time?
I see a big improvement. So when I wrote my first edition of my book, and the book was all based upon real world scenarios, the phase of my career I was in. Network segmentation, network resilient networking was still very little to be found in most environments. That has changed a lot over the last 20 years, over the last 15 years. So that fundamental basic principle of securing by architecture is well being deployed as we speak, or not as we speak, but it's being well deployed, and that's a big change. Where we're struggling right now, I think, is getting to the next phase with security monitoring, where it's getting that fundamental security monitoring. What do I have in my environment, and what's wrong with it? So there's too much fluff, in my opinion. There's so many companies who'll say, oh, we'll do XYZ and we'll add ABC, and here's 100,000 events. We have the best product, and most customers are just not ready for that. They now start to know what their environment entails, what's hanging in there, and bombarding them with events and incidents and CVEs and all of this and vulnerabilities is very overwhelming. So we need to get to a model where we say, yeah, you have 1,000 vulnerabilities, but only really two of them you should be worried about and address. And that's why I joined an MSSP, so I can be in a position to help customers like that actually make sense of these large piles of events and vulnerabilities.
Oh, that makes perfect sense, man. I mean, you run a Nessus scan on anything, and you're going to find, 50,
Right?
50 vulnerabilities. Half of them are useless. Half of them are false positives or something else. So I completely
I
understand that.
I always like it when I go into a Rockwell shop and they have a vulnerability report and or a pen test done, and it comes up with like Siemens protocols and Siemens equipment, and you should address this right away. I'm like, you even have Siemens equipment in the environment? They'd be like, no, not really. I said, okay, we'll scrap that one. And these are the ones you really have to worry about.
So you kind of mentioned like being clients being overwhelmed with things, and I know some vendors who are leaning heavily into AI monitoring, AI pen testing, AI solutions, or something. Do you see AI in the OT space as far as security is concerned? And if so, is it a good or a bad thing? Is it
You
encroaching in
know,
any way?
My answer to this is kind of also my opinion on your previous question, right? Since there was the first two adversaries that realized that they create an impact effect that aligned with their goals, uh, cyber warfare has been an arms race. And it's been a competition to be able to leverage the most cutting edge technologies and capabilities as effectively and efficiently with the dynamics of how defenders have to do their thing procedurally and attackers have to do their thing situationally. And AI is the newest escalation and the evolution of the threat landscape that we navigate together. So the ability to use like uh our architecture for our data pipeline, we're platform agnostic in how we uh create and collect our data pipeline from sensors, and so therefore we're able to normalize, harmonize the data into a universal messaging bus that we can do our threat detection engineering on to make our alerting and response protocols accordingly. Now, that is something that AI can enrich and be faster than even parsing automation or the best list sorting algorithm that isn't AI. So the ability to use AI is one as an adversary is typically quicker to weaponize new novel technologies as they do with exploits. We are going to be slower to respond, but that's not very optimistic, right?
Sure.
Because the adversary has the limited perspective. The advantage in OT, which has been not a true thing for IT for a long time, security through obscurity. It's also a part of why it's been so hard to standardize things to where we could all get along on the same page and not have that legacy system be a Windows XP box, right? Yeah.
You laugh, but that's still the norm. Like
Yeah.
half of the systems we run across in these plants are Windows XP or like Server 2003. So
I
yeah.
know of quite a few clients out there right now in production and have been for years that have active infections of Conficker. They're living with it like any other bedfellow that you can't get rid of. And it doesn't affect the safety, reliability, and the productivity of the system. So it's cool. And this comes back to something that was a really hard thing for me to accept, which was, in IT we have 0 days.
Mm,
In OT, we have forever days because you just got to
mm.
live with it.
Yep.
Interesting. Interesting.
Uh,
So you guys have named a lot of stuff. What would you say is the biggest group of security risks to the OT space? Is it ransomware? Is it hardware failures, legacy stuff? Like, what would you say is the biggest security issue that you guys are facing?
So from a tech perspective, right? So from a threat perspective, I would say that's ransomware. It's still most of the time you still see those people on the enterprise side in the office on the business side. They open the wrong email, they go to the wrong website, you bring in ransomware, and it
Right.
spreads around and it takes down the entire environment. You didn't properly
Mm,
configure your segmentation. Now your production is down. Looked like Norsk Hydro a couple years ago where on the IT side they had an AD compromise, and at the end of that compromise, the attacker decided to put Ryuk in their environment to take down all of their logs, to spread mayhem, so they wouldn't be discovered. But that also
mm.
was replicated down to the production facilities, and they had a huge downtime event with that. Uh, on the other
Interesting.
side, from internal perspective, it's misconfiguration, right? So there's two easy ways into an environment. It's either ransomware or some sort of a drive-by attack opened up a way into that organization. You can now buy that on the dark web. That's what they sell. But on the other side, people also still misconfigure their PLCs. they stick them straight onto the internet, and now you're wide open
Yeah.
looking in. So if you do a Shodan search on port 44818, which is a Rockwell Automation protocol
Right.
port, you'll find
Mhm.
tens of thousands of these
I, I wanted
exposed to the
to
internet.
I wanted to ask you about that because that's something that comes up all the time, right? Where you find an interesting port or a PLC or something, and you just do a Shodan search for it. How vulnerable is that? So say you run, Schneider Electric or something, and you see, I've run some search and Schneider Electric comes up, and I see that there's 1,000 Schneider Electric things connected to the internet. How big of a deal is that?
So like I mentioned, the port 44818, that's the way to reprogram or to program PLCs, Rockwell PLCs. So if you find an open port 44818, you can either use Rockwell Automation's software to connect to it and start programming the PLC, or you use some sort of a Python module, and it takes like 2 lines of code, and I can change tags, I can change values, or I can just completely stop that PLC over the internet. So
Mm,
that is the most serious thing you can find.
interesting.
Was doing
Interesting.
some CTI for a client attack surface intelligence package, and I discovered that there was a building maintenance control, a door magnetic lock that was available to the internet that was misconfigured in the way that it was routed, right? And after looking and seeing the banners that were available and associating the firmware, just like you would for any other kind of fingerprinting, footprinting that you would be doing, I discovered there was vulnerabilities inside of the firmware of this device, and that I could potentially be able to send directly commands to it to be able to control the status of that lock. So, and this is where the answer to your question really depends on the context of the operation, because understand some of these things that may be incorrectly configured. Because, yeah, the number one threat, in my opinion, well, statistically for all of us, not just OT, is the unintentional insider with misconfiguration. Because the same exact water valve that's used to clean your sewage could be used in a chemical processing facility. But if that water valve gets tipped over from a ping scan and an assessment, oh, shoot, dang, we're just going to have to dump it and do the cycle again. Whereas if the PLC for the other oil processing, gas, natural energy facility, uh, people die.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you
So
guys, you
that's
got,
the difference between what you find on Shodan. Some of that stuff might have been Bob the engineer that didn't get knackle training on the firewall when he decided he wanted to test his integration from home.
interesting.
I actually have a different opinion on that. So again, if you do a Shodan search on 44818, and you look at the companies that own those IP addresses that show up in the results,
Right.
like 99% of the owners are telecommunication companies, AT&T,
Mm,
Verizon, and stuff. So
okay.
and I started digging into it. So what I found is that a lot of these are like the 4G, 5G modems that IoT companies will bring to the table. So they'll come in and say, I
Mm,
can give you a smart meter that will bolt it onto the side of your machine. It looks for vibration. If a certain vibration level is reached, you need to replace the bearings, right? So one of those devices. And they'll be like, okay, in order to do that, we need to install this device. It's a 4G modem. It ties back to our cloud infrastructure where we do all of our analytics. But by misconfiguring that, now they open up their entire they open up their skit or their device, and as that is tied to the rest of the environment, you now have a backdoor into your industrial control system.
yeah,
That's a
that
much
sounds
more generous scenario. But yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's very valid.
that's a very terrifying idea or attack vector, considering that you're not talking about, a kiosk down the street. You're talking about OT environments that, as you said, people die or you could lose power for days or anything else. So that's not exactly comforting to hear that happens as often as it
No,
does.
that's
Um,
why IoT should be part of your secure architecture design. Factor it in.
Right. Yeah, makes perfect sense. So that actually kind of ties in perfectly with my next question is you guys are a global company. You work all over the place. And I know that there's a lot of different countries and different locations. You can have OT environments that are owned privately or publicly, or whatever. Do you find any differences when you're operating with clients in the public specter versus the private specter? So, like,
I mean, the,
if you did like a hydroelectric dam that was owned by like the government of Norway or something,
I've
which is
got a
a
couple of
public.
ways to
Yeah,
answer
please.
that. I think so. I mean, of course, my primary bias is that of the Department of Defense, right? And I had a lot of lessons to learn when I came to private world consulting. And there's a lot of relationships between how, of course, the DoD works, the federal space, and also some of the municipalities that we work with, or even some of the other regulatory bodies or government agencies of other countries, to where the thing that is the most familiar to me is that there is very discrete governance
Okay.
that must be adhered to, that can even control how you fill out your timesheet when you work with
Mm,
them, right? That's the there's more administrative tedium, right? Which I think is, everybody knows bureaucracy is fun.
sure.
Um, the laws of physics and procurement times tend to be a little different. Um,
Mm,
the requirements, I tend to like them better because they tend to be more discrete and specific, right?
mm,
There's very typically very well maintained schedules and expectations when working with those types of organizations. Whereas the people that need us the most, I find, are the smaller shops that don't have but two people running the OT secure, really the entire security program for a small, country water processing facility in the middle of Iowa.
mm,
Those
sure.
those are the folks that really need the help, that are the playground target for a nation state, so that they can create what I consider to be the biggest threat, of course, to critical infrastructure. The people that would have the most to gain from it and aligns with their potential objectives would be the nation state threat. Um, that's where they play, and they play for the big game of taking down a large section of our critical infrastructure whenever
So
it needs to be done.
I'm sure that you guys heard recently about the whole Chinese taking over a lot of the telecoms, and the FBI responding by saying, "Don't use text messages, use Signal and other things." Do you think, given the state entities threat actor thing, do you think that threat actors on a state level have actually already infiltrated a lot of OT environments and they're just kind of waiting? Or is it something that, you think maybe they know how to do it, or is it actually secure and they can't? Or are they even trying? Just
I'm
in your
I'm
opinion.
pretty I'm pretty sure they're already infiltrated and waiting for that moment, right? But having said that, that's mutual destruction because I'm sure the U.S. has their
Yeah,
fingers into a lot of
sure.
these across through. So if you shut our light off, we'll shut your light off. So
Yeah,
it's like we saw
sure.
in the Cold War, and we were both sitting with our finger on that button to send off rockets. It's the same in cyberspace right now. We're
Mm,
just waiting for the other one to make a move.
interesting.
I think in some ways, though, we've underestimated our adversary, specifically in the way that economics has been leveraged against us strategically for supply chain economics. There are major components inside of substations, transmission distribution stations, even generation, that are running off of hardware and firmware from Chinese state-owned companies.
Mm, sure.
Um, there's a project, I believe it's called Grid Security now, by a man named Mike Mickabee, that I found. And he does some interesting work. He analyzes the NERC filings to be able to correlate for cause and effect to find edge cases, and also keeps track of the filings where he's able to determine where Chinese components are at inside of the grid.
Interesting. That sounds like a monumental task.
He does it in his free time.
Yeah. So he's a
His wife
saint.
is His wife is not happy with his hobby because it's kind of expensive.
Yeah, that
and
sounds like
and
a yeah. Please.
no, and time consuming, right? So
Yeah.
think of it just a simple PLC or a simple switch. Even how many components are in there, and to figure out where all these came from and who really made those components is just a daunting task.
Indeed. I mean,
So
I can't even think of to do that on my laptop. You know, like just take your laptop apart and just take every last chip apart. Like that seems
Yeah.
insane. Well,
yeah, but on
interesting.
the issue specifically of the FBI press release, I'm glad that I now have an article that I can source whenever I tell a client that SMS is not a valid form of multi-factor authentication because it's something that we could never prove
Yeah.
operationally as offensive security experts
Yeah.
because it would never be approved by the provider.
Mm,
So
yeah.
I couldn't imagine a situation where it would. And yeah, so now we have the ability to let them know that yeah, while I cannot functionally do a SIM clone on you or any other kind of SMS man in the middle attack where they're not using RCS encryption, then yeah, I like it's there's no way to be able to pretend anymore. And I do think that what Pascal said is unfortunately true. I mean, last year, we got to see MITRE compromised.
Mm,
Uh, and most of those government compromises that have been publicly released, usually the root cause analysis shows that the forensics evidence shows that they are compromised for a long time because a nation state doesn't want you to know they're there. They're not going to be
right.
risky in how they operate because they want to listen for as long as they can and maintain access to go boom if they have to.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So that's an interesting question. So suppose for a moment that you guys and a client contacts you and says, "We've discovered a rogue device, or we've discovered this malicious thing inside of our network, or whatever." What is the next step? What is the time frame that like how does that get resolved? Or is it like what do you do? So client calls you and like, "Oh my God, we found this thing." What happens next?
Yeah, try to figure out what it does, right? You, initially you get the urge to just yank it off the network, but maybe you wanna put it on a switch, or maybe you want to do a port mirror session, span session on that switch, see what that device is communicated to, so you
Mm,
get an idea. Maybe it was just an employee who brought in a wireless access point just to make his life easier because now he can work from the cafeteria. Or is this a device that got inserted by some state nation actor who came in for a job interview, and they left the Raspberry Pi behind that's now sitting on your network, which is a jump way into your environment. So figuring out what it is first before you really start freaking out
right.
is the recommended path forward to begin with.
Yeah,
Makes
this is
sense.
where it's old hat for the IT guys out there. I mean, you send off an RFI if you haven't already with the relationship you have with the asset managers. And then, you know, if you haven't gotten a good idea of it already, you're going to find out how mature they are by what they send you for a topo and asset inventory and how well it's been maintained. And then they're hopefully going to send you whatever kind of relevant configurations, whatever, as much as you can in the amount of time it takes you to get a flight and get there if you need to help them out. And then, you know, if they're not a mature place, if there's only two guys that run the IT, OT, and install the footers for the badge readers, pouring the concrete, you know, then they typically are going to need you to do an asset inventory when you get there.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so
So
that's the only thing is that you're doing it under the pressure of a potential ticking clock
right,
where
right.
it stops flowing or it goes boom.
It's true. So you guys work in a unique space where you guys have a lot of components. I mean, I can only guess how many components are, you know, in a power plant or a substation or, you know, water treatment facility or any of these types of environments. Do you guys see many supply chain style attacks where oh, we have this new component or we have this replacement component that we have to plug into the network, and then boom, it's got ransomware on it already, like from the supply chain itself.
I haven't seen many of those. I have seen a lot of really risky setups where the supply chain included a vendor or a supplier of a particular part of their complete product, and they had like a wide open connection between the two networks where there wasn't even a firewall between them. They just had almost a straight line or a leased line between the two, where if ransom would break out on the vendor side, it would dribble down to their environment. So
Mm,
I've seen stuff like that. I haven't seen the infiltration come from that vector, but
interesting.
that's just me personal. There, I know there's
Sure.
a lot of that going around.
Sure. So I
Yeah.
had. Oh, please go ahead.
No, I was just thinking this is a situation that reminds me of being able to maintain the availability of this environment that you are currently trying to actively protect from the adversary. And this is true for IT and OT, where you may not necessarily understand the integrations of the environment that you're showing up to respond to, and that's why you need the subject matter expert. Like you need to
Right.
talk to the guy who actually made and maintains that database
Right.
to
Okay, that
figure
makes
out
sense.
how to use it. And so once you get that person there, Bob the engineer or whatever, the database administrator,
Right.
that's really the key to being able to make sure that you can maintain that SRP.
Interesting. Okay, that makes sense. So I give the opportunity for anybody who's a subscriber to ask questions, and I had a question, two questions actually, on the physical attacks, the kind of famous, famous, semi-famous stories that happened in the last year or so. The first one was the Fort Bragg, North Carolina substation attack, where you had some guy who realized that there was, well, really one, but they attacked two substations that were basically powering the ring around Fort Bragg. And they just shot at the substation with probably like a 308 or something at a distance. And they basically leaked out a lot of the coolant oil from the transformer, forcing the substation to be taken offline for a while. How risky is that style of attack? And how risky is it? How common is it? Is it a big deal? Is it something that you should be concerned about? Is it, it's nothing?
I think you'd be surprised if you go and do the trend analysis. And one of the places that I collected started doing that for fun was through meeting Mike McAbee. Because you'd be surprised at the history of how long of a proud tradition it is for rednecks in America to get drunk and drive around in their truck and shoot at substations. Um,
That's
like
the first thing I had to do when I got my citizenship. They told me to do that. It was 10 questions I had to answer right, and then I had to drive around drunk and shoot at signs.
Nice.
And I think it was in 2015, 2016, maybe when I first remember seeing somebody taking like a commercial off the shelf drone and just getting one that could handle enough weight to get a chunk of copper and then flying that thing into a substation past those big old tall fences they got.
Interesting.
And these attacks they've happened throughout time. And yeah, the squirrel
Yeah.
is the number one adversary
There
of
you
the
go. I was
of the
gonna go
bulk
there.
electric system. But
I was gonna use that as the answer to this, right? So, I, as of now, physical attacks are still way more common causes for uh, for downtime in especially like the electricity, the energy industry, because it's somebody shooting at it, somebody driving their plow over it, or somebody strapping a bomb onto something, or and this is 90% of the times it's those squirrels and the rodents that like to nest and eat stuff. I don't know why a rodent want to eat like a high voltage cable, but that's still almost the number one cause of downtime in your energy providers.
So I'm going to ask you the hardest question when it comes to security. How do you fix the squirrel problem?
You make a more enticing place for them to stay. I don't know.
Yeah, a lot of acorn trees, man. We got to get up on getting more nuts for the squirrels. That's it.
But they got to store those nuts somewhere safe and warm, and that's
Yeah,
a
just
that's a
not my
transformer.
transformer. Not
Right.
my transformer.
That's hilarious. So, are there any, when it comes to OT environments, is there any really, what seemingly or what most normal people would think of as a really, really tiny security issue that actually is like catastrophic? Something that a normal person would be like, oh, that's not a big deal. But for you guys, it's like if that happens, that would be catastrophic. That's something that you can't allow to happen. Kind of like the squirrel, right? Like nobody thinks the humble squirrel is a big security risk, but obviously it kind of is.
Just access to it. So your industrial environment, like I said, there's very few controls that are baked into core industrial equipment. Just having too much access, too broad of an access is devastating for those environments.
Mhm.
As it's pretty common to see database interfaces, website interfaces shared throughout the entire organization. If you do that same thing for a PLC, there is going to be somebody who is curious to see what that is all about and start to log in and make changes and inadvertently take that PLC down.
Interesting. Do you see that a lot? Do you see like threat actors
Yeah,
taking stuff down all the, yes.
not even threat actors. It's like just mistakes from employees, maybe even disgruntled employees who know what to do with that. But
Interesting.
it's most of the time it's just being available, open to the rest of the traffic, the network traffic on that segment that causes issues. That's why the first thing I always recommend is a defensible architecture with segmentation, microsegmentation, and
Right.
zoning and conduits.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. Kind of daisy chaining this with a, you talked about Shodan previously. Something that I had really hoped was when you pop out, you open up Shodan, you type in some PLC, something, and like 10,000 things pop up all over the world. I've kind of always hoped that a lot of them were honeypots by like that country's version of the FBI or somebody. Is that true, or is it do you think that that's a
No,
no? It's
there's
just people
there might
misconfiguring it.
be a handful, maybe a dozen of them are honeypots. But seriously, man, most of those are just literally misconfigured environments.
Oh, that's sad.
I do say though, if you were wanting to get bait that was just too irresistible for the most concerning adversaries, you would see who would go after some low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Well, that's kind of what
So
I was hoping for.
this no, there I do know of a lot of really cool projects for uh adversary detection. And what I something that I think we could spend an entire hour on in the future of OT cybersecurity and really cybersecurity in general is the future of threat deception.
Can you define threat deception in this context?
Um, it is the integration of robust deceptive technologies like honeypots, canary tokens,
Ah,
and facsimile networks that are generating legitimate traffic that can be observed by an adversary that has, a just too good to be true. I made you work a little bit for it, but not too hard. Access so that when anomalies are happening and not according to the scheduled simulation, that
yeah,
you've got somebody to worry about. Because most of
interesting.
my clients in oil and natural gas don't care about finding out when an adversary is in their infrastructure because that means that it's already going to be really, really bad.
Ah, okay, interesting. Have you had clients basically just say, "Look, we understand that this is a thing. We understand that maybe they're already in the system, but we don't care or we don't want to know about it," or is it? I mean, because I know that there's a lot of clients who say, "Look, we don't really want to know about all the vulnerabilities that exist out there because that just yeah, that sucks."
It's a depressing question to say yes to.
Yeah, yeah, and if you can't answer
I'm
it,
gonna
I
say
totally
no.
understand.
I'm gonna go say no because the most I dealt with, they really wanna make sure that their network is their network.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Perfect.
I agree. I agree. I do think that there's some people that just don't know enough of what they need to know to be
Right.
able to make the right decision. And that's what we're
Mm,
there for, is to help them out in those
sure.
times.
Absolutely.
But no, I think genuinely people, for whatever reason, usually if not a paycheck, because they want to continue providing value to the world. They want to do whatever it takes, right? To be able to make things keep going. Especially when there's consequences that are very, very real and physical.
That
I
makes
wanted to
perfect sense.
tie back to the deception discussion really quick because
Sure,
that made me
please.
think of a research project that Stephen Hild did a couple years ago. They had built like a complete OT network, like a canary network, like a deception network, and they had put a lot of effort into it to make it look as realistic as possible with PLCs and HMIs and processes running, and all of this looked really legit, right?
Mm.
And they put it out there, and guess what the number one infiltration, what the number one detection was of that whole environment?
I have no idea.
RDP.
Ransomware. So
Ah,
they had folks coming in, they pinged around a little bit, they looked at the PLC, they looked at stuff, and but then they just dropped ransomware and went away.
mm,
So
interesting.
I'm just saying, even though there's this vulnerability, even though these systems are on the internet, the most common attack, the most common way of utilizing this access to these environments is still ransomware, because that's a money maker. It's an
Right,
easy way to make money. It takes
right.
a lot of effort, takes a lot of cost for an adversary to go in and really target the PLC and specifically go, okay, and now we're going to attack this, and we're going to exfiltrate the secret sauce, and we're going to do this and that. No, you make your money by dropping ransomware on there, and 9 out of 10 times these guys are going to pay anyway.
Sure. Well, yeah, that sadly makes a lot of sense. I mean, do you see like how common would you say ransomware is in the OT space, like globally speaking? Do you think it? I mean, I don't know the statistics off the top of my head. Is it something that you
I'm
guys are?
I would say
It's
9 out of 10 compromises are
wow,
ransomware or involve ransomware. Yeah.
Yeah, I
interesting.
mean, when you think about it too, even if you're a nation state or nation state affiliated, I mean, it ransomware, like I said, in the scenario of the small utilities that are the training grounds, the ransomware that they employ on those environments funds their operations as well. So,
Right.
yeah, ransomware has the biggest motive. I mean, ransomware for IT a long time ago started call centers for support on, how to get us your Bitcoin payment.
Sure.
Uh, so wherever there is an incentive, one thing that's really interesting, I think that we need to bring up in this context too. In the beginning of this year, we observed just a business email compromise attack from a threat actor group that we had to respond to. That the CTI that came out subsequently, and it also explains some of the anomalous behavior that the threat actor performed, where they had a 2 week delay after they had access. They were known to be fencing access broker as well. They were
Mm,
they were doing the whole account shuffle, right,
mm,
on the finance people.
right.
And then they were also double dipping to sell the access to nation states.
Ah,
Fortunately, then I've never done this or been a part of a response where this happened. So these guys literally, we rolled tokens. Um, and right before they staged the email rules to commit the bypass for the account for account spoofing to do the
interesting.
financial crime. Yeah, so we got them right before they pulled the trigger on their impact event, according
Wow.
to logs. Yeah, it
Wow.
was.
I bet that client was really glad they hired you.
We expanded our visibility into their environment and into a couple of their other process locations. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's the evidence is in the quality and the output of the work, and that. But the thing that I bring that up in the context of, it's the IT criminal knows that while they don't have the skill set or the motive to attack a PLC network that is proprietary HMI, that isn't a part of their tool chain capability, they do know that there's value to organizations that do have that stuff. And so they want to monetize
Right.
off of that as well.
That makes, yeah, that's terrifying, but it makes sense. Do you see that most of the threat, I mean, assuming you know, are the people who go after your clients and the OT environment space, are they state entities? Are they some guy in the basement? Like, do you know, or like who your biggest or most common attackers are?
Unintentional insiders. Like I said, I mean, it's saying it's ubiquitous across our subset of the bigger cyber world, right? Like it's unintentional insiders because, like I said, in that great OTIT divide 20 years ago, where the IT team said, "Hey, let's go ahead and turn this stuff into, hey, we could encrypt this and make it TCP, and then it takes down the process control network because it's a real time operating system requirement for
Right.
zero latency on the network." They don't
Makes
understand
sense.
how the protocols work. So now we have a bunch of OT guys that are working as asset managers that went to engineering school and now have to get SAN certs and upskill into cyber. So unfortunately, there's knowledge gaps that they are brilliant on the process control side, but they just don't. He didn't get in a class on that implicit deny and how to not break it at the end of your ACLs.
Mm. Yeah. Well, I mean, to be fair, I mean, what you guys do, the OT environment space, I mean, every system that's running on there is very delicate. Like there's like very zero tolerance to mess stuff up with like pretty much every little component and every aspect. I can install anything I want on my laptop, and I have to try to break it, right, with
Mm.
software and stuff that I install. But man, you guys run one thing or install one thing incorrectly or put one patch in the wrong spot, and your whole system can come down. So I mean, it's a lot more unforgiving, I would say.
Rigid, but it also is to our advantage as defenders as well, because that creates an environment which is much more consistent in its communication behaviors.
Sure. Yeah.
True.
In that kind of brings me to a question that I'm curious about. In my world, in the physical security space, where I'm breaking into buildings and such, one of the biggest pushbacks that I'll get from clients is that, well, we don't really want to bring you on to do a physical pen test because we know that you can get into the building, so there's not really a point. That's probably one of the most common things that I get from pushback from clients. In the OT environment space, when you're trying to encourage a client to come on, what's the most common pushback that you get from your clients?
Good question.
Fear of downtime. So they are really fearsome that we'll knock something over during our process. They lose production. And we haven't touched on this, but on the IT side, you have the CIA triad, the security triad,
Sure.
confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So on the OT side, it's actually flipped around. Availability, integrity, and confidentiality is the order there, with
Mm,
availability being number one, right? So these
right.
things need to be up. I've been in environments where the process takes like 2 days to start up, and if anything happens, it will take them 2 days to clean up, another 2 days to start up. So if anything interrupts there, it
Mm,
takes them 4 days to recover, which is a big
sure.
giant downtime and money pit for them.
That makes
So
perfect
that
sense.
yeah.
Yeah, no, the CIA, and this is a fun philosophical debate. I think I've had three courses where the instructor started a critical thinking exercise by saying, which is more important, CI or A? And
Mm,
only to find out the truth is that none of them are more important than the other, because you can't really have all three if you don't have all three. They don't, that tripod doesn't stand with just the two. But in I personally, I agree with the philosophy and the framework idea of it being flipped AIC, but that's why I keep going to safety, reliability, and production being the replacement, the more important triad inside of process networks, because CIA doesn't really work for the type of risks that we're trying to treat here, because they're more physical in nature. So,
right.
like the safety is the biggest one because humans make it go. Um,
Yeah.
Reliability is important because reliability is what you need to be able to maintain safety and production. right? Like data integrity and your confidentiality and the availability to those resources. Arguably, they're not available if you can't trust the integrity. And that's even
Sure.
more so important inside of the process control network. And of course, as the
Right.
bottom line dictates what we do until we get that Star Trek utopia of the future, uh, production is what drives the dollar, and the dollar is what makes everything go. So
Sure.
at the end of the day, the C-suite will definitely, safety is the everyone's responsibility and the most important thing. But I think in the Navy, the way they did it was great. They said, um, mission first, sailor always.
Mm. Okay. Interesting.
That's how I feel about it. That's how it should be. And I always am happy to work with clients and leadership that don't just pay lip service to that philosophy.
Sure. That makes sense. I mean, yeah, great. Good leadership is vital. Um, your topic on the CIA with the availability is interesting. I had a I had somebody who works down in Mexico recently make me aware of a problem they're having. According to the Mexican government, and of course you can take this or leave it as how valid it is, they're coming across a major problem with what they're referring to as hot tapping, where you have an active water line and Jorge down in Tijuana takes a pipe and drills directly into an active water line to steal the water. And according to this report, they're seeing about 28 of these things installed per day, and they're losing about 2 to 3 million gallons of water per day. So how do you fix that? And I know I'm throwing you on the spot because this is a really hard problem, right? It's if you knew the answer, or if anybody knew the answer, I'm sure they would do it. But it's a colossal problem because you're attacking the system far away from any of the control places, right? You're just a random water pipe covered in dirt.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think a
I
lot
would
of the
look.
answer to this and the problems are not so different than the underwater sea cables for the internet, right? Maybe you think about it in that context. If you got a long stretch of physical space that has to be defended and it's almost impossible to physically respond with enough efficiency to address a surprise threat. And so
Sure.
how do you monitor that is kind of what you're saying, right? How do you
Right.
respond to that in that scenario?
Yeah.
Um, I mean, it's the basics of economics for that scenario, and they already told you that they could measure what goes in and what comes out, so they know the delta between those two. So being able to, just like we do with microsegmentation and firewalls, to increase the fidelity of our monitoring, we would be able to potentially create more monitoring between the zones, conduits, network segments of that water pipe to be
Mm.
able to find out what specific locations that we have to start developing a more, I think Pascal answered your question earlier, defensible architecture.
Yep.
The physical one, right?
Right.
Or the
Every
Right.
OT components
every
along that long stretch.
every
Yeah.
mile you do the measurements, right? You don't look at just what goes in and out of that pipe. You every mile you look what kind is coming by, so then oh yeah, previously I saw 100,000 gallons, now I see 90,000 gallons. There's something in between that's leaving. I've
Right.
I've also seen in the underground pipeline business, they use like an electrified outside of the pipeline. So if there's a breach in the pipeline, it makes a circuit to ground, and they can measure that. Maybe that would be a way to do that. But yeah, you got to
Interesting.
look at you got to look at your environment. You got to look at how you can detect this tapping or the act of tapping, and start putting some events and alerts on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that those are all good pieces of advice, but they got to do something, man, because 2 to 3 million gallons of water a day
Yeah.
is insane. So
Are
here's
they
a
sure
question.
California isn't stealing that?
Yeah, well, it could be. Who knows? Yeah, yeah, you might not be wrong on that one. In fact, I'd be surprised if California wasn't borrowing some. Um, so, so I come across, just like you guys, I come across things that just make your eyes roll when you see security things. Just the other day, I was dealing with some devices kind of in your space, the giant wind turbines, the wind turbine systems. And I came across something that the wind turbines that I was playing with, they were all keyed alike, which means one key from the manufacturer opens up all the wind turbines. So you go to the manufacturer, say, oh, I happen to own this thing, or I somehow get a copy of the key. And then I go and I open up one wind turbine, and then I can open up the second, and the third, and the fourth, and the fifth. What things in your space do you encounter that just make you go, oh, for God's sake? That just it's so difficult because you see it over and over again. It's the same mistake that you see, and it's something that you think people by 2025 should be not making the same mistake all the time. Do you have anything like that in the OT space where you just see the same types of mistakes made over and over and over, or is it just the misconfiguration thing?
I'd say misconfiguration. You see it over inadvertently putting stuff on the internet, but just to turn that around, and you're basically your scenario is like a password reuse. I would flip that around, and I still haven't seen a proper implementation across the board, a proper implementation of passwords on the production floor, right? So you either have no password, so you walk up to an HMI, you start typing away, you start changing set points, or the opposite, where the IT came in and said, "Well, we got a stringent password policy. You have to have 20 characters unique," and then you get an operator who tries to manipulate the process because they're in a state of emergency, and he's trying to remember that complex password. So. I've
Right.
I've seen that done many times wrong. Most of the time it's just no password or passwords taped on the side of an HMI that's really easy
Right.
to guess as well. So
Default
that is,
creds. Give it up for
yep.
default creds, guys. Who loves default creds in the crowd?
There you
Right?
Anybody
go.
on the offensive side of things, sure.
And
Well,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
no, and it's the same, like, the engineer that designed those wind turbines you were talking about, he probably got an attaboy because he made a scalable architecture for the engineer wind turbines to where with minimal integration requirements, they're able to copy and paste this design across there. So it's very like
Yeah.
all of the things that are his interests and the requirements that he's given to get his good boy points. He did an outstanding job. So, you know,
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong, man. That's probably that. Honestly, I can actually see how
money,
that conversation went.
money, right? It's more manageable, and you don't have to have 20,000 keys for each and every one, because it's probably going to be the same person who goes from windmill to service it anyway. So having one key on his key chain is a lot easier.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but yeah.
a lot less to lose.
Yeah,
Who cares? Who cares about
And,
how
you
secure
lose
by
one, we
design
still
it
have
is?
20,000 other ones because we rebuilt this thing 20,000 times. So
exactly.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Exactly.
every
Yep.
That's funny. I don't know. So speaking of stuff over here in Europe, I don't know how connected you are with the new security standards over here, but in October, I think it was October 2024, three security standards took over. You had the NIS2, the CER, and the DORA. And the CER specifically basically just pertains to critical infrastructure and stuff. And without loss of generality, they're basically just saying, look, you like in all across the board, you have to drastically up kit or increase your cyber and physical security stuff. Are you guys seeing a huge upswing in traffic and business and client demand and other things because of like new security standards or threats going on in the world, or the instability that, or is it just kind of business as usual for you guys?
we've seen an uptick since the U.S. government put more standards in there, right? Uh, but yeah, it all comes down to you can make as many rules and regulations as you want, but who's gonna check on that, right? If you
Right.
tell all of the pipeline owners they need to adhere to a certain standard, how do you effectively and efficiently go out and make sure that that's all being implemented as well? And I think eventually we'll get to a process like that,
Mm,
but at the moment that's really difficult
right.
to regulate.
Fair
Yeah,
enough.
I've found two different types of clients that are correlatively more mature. Two factors that I think are pretty consistent across my sampling groups here, and that is the threat of death or the threat of what some would consider to be worse than death, bureaucracy from regulatory bodies. So, um, that tends to drive a lot of maturity in environments where otherwise, because of the limitations, they just can't do it. Right. I keep going back
Sure.
to small water utilities.
Right.
Very, very critical, but very well understood to be underfunded. Um,
Mm.
so there's definitely a lot of concern on being able to make sure that those environments are given the due care, even though they may not have discrete or effective governance for the regulatory bodies yet. We're seeing some of that roll out, the birth of a regulation for an industry with the TSA pipeline security directives, right? And the type of
Mm.
pushback, the iterative RFC process that happens when you try and tell a bunch of people how they're allowed to make money.
Sure.
Uh, but it's a necessary thing, and that means that for the smaller folks that are trying to do it, then hopefully, there is some cooperative effort and subsidization of those requirements to be able to put them in those environments that need it, to put security controls in those environments that need it, rather. And that to me is what we need, is the appreciation factor to increase, because you appreciate risk when you are, this is a terrible thing of the human condition, you appreciate risks more when you have been the victim of a consequence.
Well, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah. I mean, you're not wrong, but that is sad that it has to be that way.
You're very lucky if you can be wise enough to take the lessons of another person.
Sure. That's a very prophetic way of saying it. Yeah.
It doesn't happen often. And most of the time in these industries where we have people that are experts in very complex domains of physical sciences and engineering, that there is the imposter Dunning-Kruger roller coaster ride that everyone is subject to if you work in a STEM field, some more than others. But those guys sometimes aren't, just because of what their focuses aren't able to be able to see the bigger picture. And that's another thing that I really, because of the fact that Pascal writes in a style that is accessible to many people. It's very basic in the way that he presents these things that have become very uh, over complicated. And uh, we are able to help people build a cross-domain cybersecurity organizational support model through the training, the tabletop exercises, the executive advisory work that we do, the governance, risk, and compliance work. And one thing that I really enjoy here that I didn't think that I would get is a tribe like I had in the military of professionals that are some of the best in the field using cutting edge technology to solution the problems that are as old as time, right?
Mm.
Protection domains from computer science are alive and well. We may call them buzzwords like zero trust, but using the newest methods to employ the oldest philosophies of discrete logic. That's that's what I get to do every day with some of the best people out in the industry. And I'm proud to work at a historied company that founded the nation's critical infrastructure. So
Yeah.
this is
I
a
mean,
great place to be. Great mission set that they have, and I can do more for helping my country and the world in private industry than unfortunately I could have as a enlisted guy in the old
mm,
Navy. But
sure.
yeah, no, it's a great problem to have because it's how we can make the greatest impact to protect humanity.
Absolutely. So now, I mean, you're not wrong about that. If I understand correctly, 1898 is based on like the actual year of conception, I think, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I mean, you definitely been around for, or well, not you, but your company has been around for a considerable amount of time. Gaining experience and clients and trial and error and all that. Now, you mentioned training and tabletops and everything that you guys do. So what is on the horizon for you guys? Like, anything new that you're up to, anything that you want to talk about, or anything that you guys have on the horizons for you?
Yeah, so I mean, it's all CI/CD, baby. We do have an agnostic universal message bus. I think I kind of outlined a very high level explanation of that, and that's against a very long list of different security controls, mostly for 24 by 7 threat protection, detection and response services. Um, we use the networking monitoring tools that is the du jour of our client, and the endpoint protection tools, EDR, XDR, whatever, to be able to get the contextual visibility of the communication and the talkers. And so to be able to continuously advance ourselves, especially with a rapid acceleration in capability development across the entire industry, with generative AI being an accelerator for their development, we have to make sure that we're maintaining the ability to be agnostic across all of the different vendors that are in the market and also moving into the market, to like from the IT space. We are constantly assessing the latest and greatest and its capabilities to be able to support the requirements as they align to the process environments that we serve.
Well, I mean, that's a very good message, and I mean, like I said, you guys have over 100 years of history behind you. So I mean, it's yeah, you guys definitely have the experience. What now? Kind of the last question that I wanted to throw at you guys, but what is the, if any, security issues that you think that the world isn't talking or taking seriously enough that you think they should? So
Hmm.
is there any issue today, security wise, that you think we should be talking about, but we're really not?
I think the simple fact of having to outsource a lot of these resources, right? So a lot of companies have gone away by must have gone away from having an in-house industrial control system group, right? As to where before you could have a few engineers, they would keep your entire facility up to date, and they would do the projects. But as automation continues to expand with all kinds of reaches, those people are going to be short-lived, or not short-handed. You can't find many of them throughout the world. So we're seeing a lot of outsourcing. With that outsourcing, we're also seeing a lot of more cloud adaptation. So
Mm,
where they bring the HMI, where they bring the databases, and God forbid, eventually the PLCs out to the cloud, because it makes easy for those outsourcing companies to get to them. You don't have to set up
right.
VPNs. You don't have to set up all kinds of measurements or the controls in place, so that those outsourced people can go into your facility and do the maintenance of it. So that brings risk with
Mm,
it as well, from from uptime perspective, as well as a security perspective. As we all know, the cloud isn't all that secure as they thought it was going to be,
right.
right? There's downtime, there's attacks, there's misconfiguration, and all of that. I think that is going to be a very, very crucial problem to have in the near future.
You
Yeah.
know, the
Please.
biggest problem that I know that I can think of is really the workforce problem. I mean, in cyber, we've enjoyed for a long time an asymmetrical demand supply. We have enjoyed a lot of supply and demand that has allowed the market to reward us very well, and give us a lot of opportunities for those who want to come and be undeniable. However, in OT, that is even more of a strain and shortage, right? Because hopefully you get an IT guy that took enough time and paid enough attention and has enough interest in OT requirements to be able to have a respectable conversation with the process engineer. And it's even more rare because it's an odds game where there's guys that are from Pascal's diversity of an OT guy that becomes a cyber guy, and even more so of an OT guy that becomes a balanced cyber guy, right? Because there's just far less of them. I've seen less of it because there are more unicorn statistics, but the ability for us to find the people that can stay on the edge to meet the demand of the evolving threat landscape is very, very rare. We need you in industrial cybersecurity, and the water's fine. Come on in, guys. We need the help on the people to be able to defend this stuff. Now, that's good for me as a consultant, but for me as a human living in this civilization, I need as many people. I need to copy and paste me, Pascal, and everybody else out there that's moving the needle to be able to help out all of these different places so that some of the most critical unsung heroes of our supply chain economics are well supported by their own teams to where they don't have to rely on somebody for critical functions, right? Because Smokey the Bear rules. We leave this place better than we found it. If I did good, I worked myself out of a job, and you learned how to be able to manage your vulnerabilities better.
Sure. Okay, so that does beg the question, though. So if you're in need of new people, what does it take? What advice would you give to some, sophomore high school level student who says, you know what, I want to do what you guys do? What advice would you give to them to actually do it, to actually accomplish it?
That's a great.
Start studying, man. Yeah, there's so many resources out there now that can help you get into cybersecurity. There's projects that will simulate the industrial environment. If you can do like an internship with a big industrial company, go for it. But never stop learning, because this stuff is so new, and just because you don't have a fully industrial background doesn't mean that you can't contribute in some way, right? IoT is infiltrating the industrial space, which is fairly easy to get into. Network security is still one of the main disciplines within industrial cybersecurity. So there's always ways that salespeople, presenters, promoters, you name it. It doesn't have to be this one particular function. Some OT guy with an OT background now can do OT pen testing. Well, that's only one role within the spectrum. Find out what you like and start studying and start working towards that.
Very
Yeah,
good advice.
no, yeah, it takes a village, and so Brett's 5 minutes parasocial mentorship, personal professional development talk. Check out cyberseek.org. It's pretty great to be able to just get an idea of where the job market is demanding your skills go, and you can do some trend analysis on where the place for you to fit in is, right? They have great ways that align to the NIST framework to be able to granularly see the type of work that's being done. And so when you get that idea of what kind of work excites you that you might be interested in, or you got an idea of how to get to that position of pen testing, and you've never, you don't even know what root is, then you have the options of getting some training, getting your skills in. Now you can pay for training, get it streamlined to you, or you can go out there and do it the old way and grind with hard data and books, and that's going to require you to get a lab.
Right.
Microcomputers out there, I think for $1,000, I've got 16 threads on 96 gigs, and it's fits in like an 8-inch by 4-inch by 6-inch box, and that's something I can do simultaneous compute for both Linux and Windows, or whatever kind of distro you want to spin in the virtualization cluster, like type 1 hypervisor like Proxmox. And then you figure out that cert map. There's one, I can't remember how to spell this guy's name. It's like Paul Jeremy's cert roadmap. If you Google for that on, I believe, GitHub, or for on his GitHub listing for it, he's built out and he's done a good job maintaining it. A fairly comprehensive cert roadmap. And, like I recommend a lot of people starting out, if they've got some experience, they start off with like a Sec Plus, a good general entry level cert. And that way they'll get a lot of taste of the different domains of cybersecurity. And once you get that figured out, you find out what speaks to you, what really makes you sweat like you're playing your favorite video game while you're doing the analysis. And that's what you start chasing, bud. Like, that's how you go and get that golden ring for yourself of personal professional development, to start getting it done. And for cybersecurity in the industrial space, there's some good free resources from the Idaho National Labs. It's now under the Department of Homeland Security that anybody with an email address can go and get. Of course, if you have a special email address, you get more options, but I highly recommend you leverage that. There's only one college that we are on the advisory board for, that has an industrial cybersecurity a bachelor's degree program at Idaho State University. It's really hard to be able to train people on this stuff unless it's in person. And that's kind of a bummer. But I think with a lot of the stuff that we're seeing in the development of virtual and augmented reality, I think some of those training requirements, while they may not have nearly the same type of experience, the context, the flavor of an actual process control network, at least you can get spun up on the basics to get there. So there's a lot of Conpot is a very popular for a long time, honeypot that is for industrial control systems that you can set up in your lab. Malcolm is a scene that is the open source version of the elk stack that's maintained by the Idaho National Labs as well. Luzza for EDR. Get in there, get in your lab, and get to work, and figure out how to make a coffee maker with automation, but not with the one that came with the coffee maker. Find one of those $15 ones from the thrift store, and then figure out how to use a PLC off of Automation Direct to make it start brewing that Joe before you brush your teeth. That's how you get it. You chase it with a lab, bud.
Well, there you go. That's a full roadmap for anybody who wants to get into this. You've got the college, you've got the certifications, you got to know exactly where to go. That was quite the roadmap. So thank you very much.
Hit me up on LinkedIn if you want to hear more, and take the parasocial fun to a real social relationship. I'm happy to help people get over here, because like I said, the water's nice and we really need you.
Yeah, absolutely. Could you tell anybody where they could find you exactly on LinkedIn or any other place that they could?
I think I am Brett Seals on LinkedIn, and because of the occupational hazards I've had for my last life, everything else I got is a sock puppet account, so you can't have those.
All right, fair enough. All right, well, gentlemen, Pascal, Brett, thank you both for coming on today and taking the time.
Our pleasure.
And I wish you all the best, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
It's been fun.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Take care.
Thank you, guys. Take care, guys.